Imagine if the only way you could succeed in business was to be the next Uber or Airbnb. There's an unhealthy narrative around these unicorn companies that needs to be debunked. On this NSP Short, Brice Scheschuk talks about how he mentors entrepreneurs to ensure they understand there are many ways to succeed in business.
And what I saw happening in the tech ecosystem in Canada was over the last, I'll say, started a decade ago, but it kind of grew and grew and grew, is this narrative has taken hold where to be a successful founder, it means you need the validation of having raised institutional venture capital, put yourself on a certain growth treadmill, and away you go. And that became the all-consuming narrative for founders.
What's institutional venture capital?
Yep, great question. So companies need to finance themselves.
Yep.
Okay. There's equity and debt, the two big deltas, right? The two different types of financing that you typically do. Mm-hmm. Equity, issuing shares for capital to use to grow your business, can happen to a number of different parties on the other side of the table. There is a structured market called the institutional venture capital market that basically has evolved over the last, really actually 50 years, but really on steroids over the last 20, that funds high growth startups that are looking to innovate. So I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Classic example is Uber.
Yeah.
Think about Uber, okay? This young guy named Travis Kalanick and a good Canadian named Garrett Kemp run around Silicon Valley, and they're like, we have this idea. We're going to use a tech platform to allow you to hail cars, strangers, to come and pick you up and take you to a destination. There's a payment involved, and, it'll be a better service than a taxi. First of all, that must have been a very interesting pitch to land. Think how hard that would be. Wait a second. Let me get this straight. A stranger in a Corolla is going to show up at my house and pick up my daughter and take her to a party. Right. So the beauty of a thing in this ecosystem is we call them outlier companies. Uber is obviously an outlier company. The pitch makes no sense.
Right.
And no one understands it at the time, but in hindsight, it all looks like a genius.
Right.
The capital that funds those kinds of businesses is called venture capital. What happened is call it in the mid-2010s, the capital flowing into that asset class really increased. There were quite a few wins from an exit, so from selling them ultimately, Uber being a big one, Airbnb, DoorDash, all name brand companies that we now know. And it caused more capital to flow. And it kind of took over this narrative where the only way you can be successful is to be like an Uber.
Right.
And the reality is that is actually insane. And that doesn't make sense. And we didn't have a balancing narrative to that because we kind of all swum up a river or down a river this way. And I said, I got to swim up the river and kind of go against the current and put a balancing narrative. And I've never had founders basically come out of that and they feel a bit liberated and they realize that there's many, many ways to finance your business and there's no one size fits all. And quite frankly, they start to understand the business model of high growth, and it's a pretty hard business model. You could imagine how many failures there are in that. So it's a 45-minute-er. I use a lot of deal examples. I'm very blunt when I speak and we have a lot of experience I've been at that for 30 years. And so I got lots of examples and I can kind of make some jokes about myself and it lands well and I'm going to keep doing it for as long as it's needed.
You may be blunt, but that's got to be a hopeful narrative because if you're looking down the barrel of the idea that you have to be a unicorn like a Airbnb, like an Uber, then you may get yourself into this position where you say, well, why am I bothering?
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean it's not hard work, but it seems a lot more attainable when you don't have to be an Uber. You can be a whole bunch of other things.
That is absolutely true. Look, the term unicorn. You just used it. That's another example of a narrative taking hold. You have to build a unicorn.
Right.
That's a measure of success. No, you don't. What you have to do is build what makes sense for you, execute effectively, fund your business the way you want to grow it, keep enough ownership such that on exit you have a meaningful return to yourself, and maybe rinse and repeat, or maybe just chill maybe
Right.
mentor others after, whatever that narrative is. It is not, you have to jam yourself full of this capital and grow at all costs. That is not a fair narrative to founders.